It seems that the worst thing a woman can do to the man she claims to love is betray that love by cheating on him. Mark Hurley thought about this as he sat alone in the dark. Just a few hours ago, he thought he had it all: a great job in a good company with good pay, a nice home, and a loving wife. He still had the first two, but the third was different. He thought about his life with Allison, his wife of almost 5 years. He met her shortly after she joined the company where he works, the Marcus Financial Group, a company that helps small businesses with their finances. Like many others, she started out in administrative support, handling all the little clerical tasks that needed to be done in their business transactions. From there, she became an executive assistant to Jake Marcus, his boss, about 7 months ago. It's no coincidence that Jake's last name is Marcus. His grandfather founded the company decades ago and passed it on to his son, Alan, the current CEO. Alan brought his son, Jake, into the business after he graduated from college a couple of years ago and started it like everyone else so he could learn the ropes. He did, and was quickly promoted to his current position as regional manager, reporting only to Alan and the board of directors. Of course, at some point Jake would become CEO, but that was still a long way off. Mark loved and respected Alan. Alan was something of a father figure to him and helped him transition back into civilian life after being wounded in Iraq. They met while Mark was undergoing physical therapy. Alan had just finished a meeting with the facility's board and stopped to watch a Marine veteran train. Alan saw something in Mark and bought him lunch that day. They discussed many things during this lunch, and Alan was surprised to learn that Mark had completed his 4-year business degree just days before being deployed to Iraq. Alan was impressed with the young Marine and offered him a job on the spot. Surprised, Mark accepted the offer and went to work for Alan the following Monday. This was almost 8 years ago. Mark finished therapy and focused on his work, taking night classes to earn his MBA. Then Allison appeared. He was captivated by her the day they first met. After making sure that there would be no consequences from HR, he asked her out on a date. They dated for several months, fell in love, and eventually got married. Alan surprised Mark by paying for their honeymoon to Hawaii. 3 years after their wedding, Alan brought Jake into the company. Mark hoped that something from the old man had passed on to Jake, but he quickly realized that this was not entirely true. Jake loved to show off, letting people know who his father was, and that one day he would be the one to occupy the large corner office on the top floor. Jake somehow managed to alienate almost everyone around him. One day, Alan talked to Mark about his son and expressed the same concerns that Mark had heard from others. "You know, I'll have to make him a regional manager at some point, Mark," Alan said. "I know," Mark said. "I'm counting on you to be an example. Maybe you can help Jake transition into office," Alan said. "Can you do it?" "I think so, Alan," Mark said. "It won't be easy, though." "What's your honest opinion of him, Mark?" Alan asked. "Don't deceive me. Forget that he is my son. Tell me straight." "Okay, I'll tell you," Mark said. "He's too opinionated to be effective, in my opinion. He refuses to listen to others, spends too much time flirting with girls, and likes to throw his name around. Allison tells me he's a walking problem for every woman in the office. He not only loves to pursue women, but also to brag about it." Alan shook his head. "I was afraid of it," he said. "His mother spoiled him since he was born, allowed him almost everything. I was hoping that getting him involved would help him grow up a little. I'll talk to him." "So when is Bill going to retire?" I asked. Bill Collins, the current regional manager, worked for the company for many years and was loved by everyone. He had long talked about retiring and bought a home in northern Idaho so he and his wife could retire in the country while he was still young enough to enjoy life. "Within the next 6 months or so," Alan said. "He's determined to do it. Personally, I don't blame him." Alan left the office, promising to stay in touch. Mark knew he would keep his promise. There were other things Mark noticed about Jake that he didn't tell the old man. After thinking about it, he realized he probably should have. Bill retired a few months after this conversation, and Alan promoted Jake to his position. Jake quickly began making changes. Some of them were good, but Mark wasn't so sure about others. He continued to do his job and tried not to let Jake bother him too much. Jake did change as he settled into the position, but Mark didn't like it. Jake was prone to micromanaging, often annoying the more experienced team members. He also liked to move people around, sometimes into positions that practically set them up for failure. One day, a little over 7 months ago, Jake walked into Mark's office. He plopped down in the chair opposite Mark as he talked to a client. When Mark hung up, he saw Jake grinning. "What can I do for you, Jake?" Mark asked. "I'm thinking about hiring a new executive assistant," he said, "and I think Allison would be perfect for the role." "My wife?" Mark asked. "That Allison?" Jake nodded, the grin never leaving his face. "The same one," Jake said. "What's wrong with Gretchen?" Mark asked. Gretchen Wilson served as Bill's executive assistant for many years. "Nothing," Jake said. "She's just about to retire, and the office could use some new blood." "Yep," Mark thought. Rather a new sight for Jake. "Have you talked to Allison about this?" Mark asked. "Not yet," Jake said. "I wanted to talk to you first." "About?" Mark asked. "I appreciate it, but why?" "I wanted to know what she was like," Jake said. "After all, you live with her. You sleep with her every night. Is she bitchy and demanding, or always happy and cheerful? Is she playful or serious? I want to know what awaits me if I hire her." Mark didn't like the direction this conversation was going, not at all. "Well, Jake," Mark said, "firstly, Allison and I are very happily married, and yes, she always brings me joy. Secondly, she is married. To me. Thirdly, she is a professional. If you think she is suitable for this position, then offer her this job. Whether she accepts it or not is up to her. But the most important thing to remember is that she is married to me." Mark deliberately repeated his words so that Jake would understand his position. "Got it," Jake said. "You've probably heard the rumors and are worried. I would be worried too if I were married to a beauty like Allison. If she takes this job, it will mean travel, sometimes overnight. Are you okay with that?" "I trust my wife," Mark said. "If she accepts a job knowing that it's part of the responsibilities, then she knows the boundaries. And I expect you to respect those boundaries, and our marriage." "Of course, Mark, old man," Jake said, the grin still on his face. "I know you and my old man are close. He respects you, and so do I. Believe me, I will never do anything that could come between you and Allison." "I hope so," Mark said. "Who knows?" Jake said. "Maybe this will be your promotion." That night, Mark spoke to Allison. "Did you talk to Jake today?" he asked as she finished preparing dinner. "Yes," she said. "He mentioned something about wanting me to be his new executive assistant." "And what do you think about this?" Mark asked. "Well, it will mean travel and maybe late hours, but it will also mean a nice bump in pay," she said. "We could really use some extra money, especially if we're going to have kids someday." "Why? Are you worried about something?" "I just remember you telling me that he was a problem for every woman in the office," Mark said. "Do you still think so?" "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried," she said. "I hear all the rumors, you know. Do you trust me?" He looked at her before answering. "Of course I do," he said. "But I trust him as much as I can throw at him. He came into my office today and asked how you were at home. Personally, I thought it was a little cheeky." "It's just his way," she said. "What did you answer him?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "I told him you're always a joy, and I meant it," Mark said. "I have also made it clear that we are happily married, and I expect him to respect that." "I myself expect nothing less," she said. "Okay," Mark said. "So are you going to take this job?" "I think so," she replied. That night they went to bed and made love before falling asleep. She accepted the job and, as expected, was away at least once every 2 weeks for 2 days. She also worked late at least 3 nights a week. Mark dealt with it as best he could and did everything he could to support Allison in her new role. He looked closely, but didn't see anything to indicate she was being unprofessional in her new job. Then the unthinkable happened a little over 3 months ago. Alan suffered a massive stroke in his office. Paramedics were called and he was rushed to hospital, but he did not survive the night. He died without regaining consciousness. Everyone in the company was shocked by the news and attended his funeral. Mark and Allison were surprised by the number of people who came there. Jake thought that his father's sudden death meant he would immediately take over Alan's office and become CEO. But the board of directors thought otherwise, saying Jake was too inexperienced for the role. Despite Jake's vehement objections, the board brought in David Matheson to serve as interim CEO until a suitable candidate was found. Jake became a different person after this and decided to prove that he was ready to lead the company. He forced Allison to work late into the evening almost every night and to accompany him on trips almost every weekend. It didn't matter whether Mark and Allison had plans or not. The schedule took a toll on both of them and their marriage. For starters, their sex life had virtually disappeared. He also noticed changes in Allison's wardrobe, where before she wore business and professional attire, she now wore things that were a little more revealing. Moreover, her attitude towards him changed. She was always outgoing, friendly, funny, and respectful. But now she became more demanding, quick-tempered, and began to make little barbs at him. He thought it might just be stress from work. Finally, one Sunday evening, when Allison returned from a trip to New York, he sat her down to talk. "Allison," he said, "we need to talk." "About what?" she asked with sharpness in her voice. "About us," he said. "I barely see you. This Jake schedule is not only killing you, it's killing us. We need to take some time off and rebuild our relationship." "Sorry," she said. "Jake has a lot on his plate right now. It's crazy. I can't help it." "Tell Jake you're taking a week off," he said. "You have time. We need to do this if we want to save our relationship." Allison was silent for a few moments, collecting her thoughts. He could understand that this was bothering her too. Finally, she nodded her head. "You're right, Mark," she said. "I need a break. Jake has been pushing me the last 3 months. I'll talk to him tomorrow, I promise." "Please do it," Mark said. The next day, Allison returned home happier than he had seen her in a long time. "What's happened?" Mark asked. "I talked to Jake like I promised, and he agreed we needed to take a break," she said. "He said we could both take the next week off as long as we came to a party at his house on Friday night." "Party?" Mark asked. "What party?" "Just a little meeting with him and some of his friends," she said. Mark didn't like it, partly because he couldn't stand Jake, but also because he didn't think it was appropriate to have fun with his boss. As they say, intimacy breeds contempt. Plus, he didn't know who else would be at this meeting. "Do you know these people?" Mark asked. "I've met some of them," she said. "It's mostly his friends from college, but one or two of them work with clients. I don't know who else will be." "I see," Mark said. "Well, okay, but only if you can come home at a normal time this week. Can you?" "I think so," she said. "But we have to work on the Hendersons' account on Wednesday. Jake is having dinner with them, and he wants me there." Mark knew about the Henderson manufacturing account. It has been a priority since Alan started working on it before his stroke. "Okay," Mark said. "Wednesday evening, but for the rest of the week, I want you to be home at a normal time." "Agreed." She smiled and hugged him. "It's agreed," she whispered, kissing him on the lips. The next afternoon, Jake showed up at Mark's office and, as usual, sat down in the chair in front of his desk. As always, he had a smirk on his face. "What can I do for you, Jake?" Mark asked. "Ellie says you're going to Friday night," Jake said. "Ellie?" thought Mark. Where did this come from? He called her that once, and she made it clear that she hated the name. "Yeah, we talked about it a little last night," Mark said. "As long as she gets home on time for the rest of the week, and that we take next week off to repair our relationship." "Of course," Jake said. "We're having dinner with the Hendersons on Wednesday, but I promise there won't be any late nights the rest of the time." "What kind of party will it be?" Mark asked. "And who will be there?" It's just an informal meeting, Jake said. A few of my old friends from college will be there. One of them works for a client, but nothing fancy. Come in casual clothes. No need to bring anything, except Ellie, of course. Mark took note of this and nodded. Jake wasn't finished. By the way, Mark, old man, Jake said, making Mark inwardly cringe. You were right. Ellie is really nice to have around. I appreciate that you let her spend so much time working without any hard feelings. She's really good at her job. Honestly, I'd be lost without her. Mark didn't quite know how to feel about this. Glad you're happy with her work, Jake, he said. But there is one question. Which? Jake asked. You call her Ellie around her? Mark asked. Of course, he said. Why? Just wondering, Mark said. That's all. He mentioned it to Allison at dinner that night. Do you always let Jake call you Ellie? He asked. I'm just wondering because you never let me call you that. I think he's my boss, and he can call me whatever he wants, Allison said. Mark let it go, but it continued to bother him. The rest of the week went pretty well, and with the exception of Wednesday, she got home on time, and they made love whenever they could. On Friday, after Mark put on jeans and a casual shirt, he watched Allison get ready for the party and noticed the dress she had chosen. He had never seen the dress before and wondered when she bought it. It was much shorter than her other dresses and showed a lot of skin. Wow, Mark said. You look like you could be eaten. Maybe we should stay home and play. She smiled. No, she said, after we get back. By the way, where did you buy this dress? Mark asked. I've never seen it. It certainly doesn't look everyday. I bought it last time we were in New York, she said. Jake asked me to wear it tonight. Of course, he thought. Be careful, Mark said. Someone might get the wrong idea. She giggled. I don't think so, she said. Everyone knows their limits. We better know, Mark said, hugging his wife. He tried to kiss her, but she waved him off. Later, she said, I don't want to ruin my makeup. They drove to Jake's two-story townhouse, located in a rather posh part of town, and rang the doorbell. Jake opened the door and invited them inside. 3 other young men around Jake's age entered the living room, and Jake introduced them to Mark. Guys, this is the man of the hour, Mark Hurley, Jake said with a big smug smile on his face. Mark, this is John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins. Alan, by the way, works for Henderson. Mark shook hands with all 3 and wondered what Jake meant by calling him the man of the hour. He also wondered why Jake didn't introduce Allison. Did she already know them? Jake turned his attention to Allison. Oh my God, Ellie, you look so damn hot in that dress, he said. I knew it would. Doesn't she look damn hot, guys? He asked, turning to the other 3 men. They all nodded, their tongues almost dragging along the floor. Allison smiled and turned around as if she was modeling a dress for them. They whistled approvingly. Mark had to admit that she did look good, but he didn't like Jake's reaction. Where are my manners? Jake asked. Let me get you something to drink. Ellie, I know you like white wine. How about you, Mark? I'd like white wine too, Mark said. I haven't been drinking much lately. I have a low tolerance for alcohol. Mark didn't actually have a low alcohol tolerance. The truth was that he could probably get these guys blackout drunk. He practically stopped drinking years ago when he was in the Marines. In fact, he was angry when he drank and almost did something wrong the last time he got drunk. After that, he vowed that it would never happen again. No problem, Jake said. Be right back. Jake returned with 2 glasses and handed them to Mark and Allison. Allison took a long sip of hers, while Mark took several small sips. Mark's internal alarm increased, and he vowed to stay sober for as long as possible. Something about all this haunted him. Jake invited everyone to take a seat in the living room, and Mark followed Allison, noticing that she sat down on the love seat. He was about to sit next to her, but Jake was there first. Instead, he sat down on the sofa, which stood opposite, and carefully watched his wife. Jake looked at him for a moment. Sorry, old man, he said. Force of habit. I'm used to sitting in this spot on the couch." "It's okay," Mark said, looking at his wife. She looked back, but couldn't read his face. They sat for a while, talking about small things. Jake looked at Mark before speaking. "My father told me you were in the Marines," he said. "This is true?" Mark nodded. "Yes, I served for 5 years before I got a medical discharge," he said. John looked at Mark. "Marines, huh?" he asked. "Heard they're real tough guys. Have you ever seen combat?" Mark nodded slowly. He hated it when people asked about it. "Yes," he said quietly. Allison looked at him, surprised. He never told her about this. He'd spent the last few years trying to forget about it all. "You never told me about this," she said. "It's not something I like to talk about," he said. "You know," Jake said, pointing his finger at Mark, "this man is, without a doubt, the best business analyst in the company. Hell, he saved us millions of dollars in lost revenue. Moreover, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have this beautiful being as my assistant." Allison smiled at him, and Mark noticed that it wasn't just a smile in return for a compliment. There was something else there. He also noticed how she seemed to hang on his every word. "Actually," Jake said, looking at Mark, "I like to think of her as my work wife." He patted Allison's bare leg, and Mark thought he saw Jake's hand begin to move under her short dress. Mark saw Allison's face turn red for a moment before Jake removed his hand. "Honestly, I would be lost without her," Jake added. "And I would," Mark said, watching Jake's reaction. He couldn't help but notice that Allison looked down at the floor for a moment. "Sorry, I need to go to the bathroom," Mark added, breaking the silence in the room. "Of course," Jake said. "Go down the corridor, first door on the left." Mark got up and went to the bathroom. Locking the door behind him, he looked at himself in the mirror, millions of thoughts swarming through his head. The main one was that Allison was cheating on him with Jake. Jake was right about one thing: Mark was a damn good analyst because he paid attention to detail. That's what Alan taught him when he first started. "Remember, son, it's not all about the numbers. In any business agreement, the devil is always in the details," the old man told him. "Pay attention to details, trust your intuition, and you will never go wrong." Mark took the old man's words to heart, and they always helped him. Now he had other details to think about. First, there's Allison's dress, or lack thereof. Secondly, the interaction between her and Jake. Then there was her reaction to Jake's touch and words. What kind of work wife is this? What does this even mean? And then there were all the little things he'd noticed over the past 3 months. Collectively, this all meant trouble, and if he was right, it would also mean the end of his marriage. He sensed something was going to happen, and knew he needed to leave there with something tangible that he could use as evidence. He thought about just taking Allison and leaving, but he felt that would only cause an argument and delay the inevitable. He saw his cell phone in his shirt pocket and noticed that the camera was peeking out of the pocket. This is it, he thought. He pulled out his phone and started recording video before putting it back in his pocket. Having done his business, he rinsed off the water and washed his hands. Having prepared himself, he opened the door. When he returned to the living room, he noticed Allison suddenly sit up as she leaned over the coffee table. He sat up and saw the guilty look on her face. He picked up his glass and took a small sip when he noticed undissolved granules of some kind of powder at the bottom of the glass. What the hell? He quickly put the glass back on the table and noticed that everyone was looking at him. He started to say something, but suddenly felt very tired and could not say anything coherent. "Are you okay?" Allison asked. He looked at her, confused, unable to speak. Jake and the 3 men stood up. Allison stood up too and grabbed Jake's hand. He looked at them, wondering what they were going to do next. He tried to get up, but couldn't. "Why don't you take a little nap, Mark, old man?" Jake said as the other men lifted his legs onto the couch. Mark couldn't say or do anything as Allison took off his shoes. He wanted to get up, grab her, and run away as quickly as possible. Allison walked over to him and covered him with a blanket. He wanted to grab her by the throat, but could not move his hands. She leaned over and kissed his forehead. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered in his ear. I really love you." Unable to keep his eyes open, he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up, it was dark. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. No one seemed to be conscious. He listened and heard only snoring coming from above. Looking at his phone, he realized that he had been out for just over 3 hours. He stopped the video recording and put the phone back in his pocket. He quietly walked upstairs and peered into the master bedroom, trying to stay in the shadows. He saw Allison, naked on Jake's bed, her hand on his chest and one leg on his. The other two men were also sleeping, one on the sofa under the window, the other in a large chair in one of the corners. He quietly went back downstairs. He wanted to know what he was drugged with, so he rummaged around Jake's kitchen until he found a container with a lid. He poured the drink into the container and closed it tightly. Returning to the living room, he took Allison's set of keys out of her bag and noticed a key he hadn't seen before. It looked like a house key, but not their house key. Acting on intuition, he removed the key and put it in his pocket. Then he had another thought and took Allison's phone, putting it in his pants pocket. He planned to review it later. Taking off his wedding ring, he carefully placed it on top of Allison's bag so she could easily spot it. He put on his shoes and quietly walked out the door. Details, he thought. He looked around but didn't see a security system or remote control anywhere near the door. Opening the front door, he tried the key he had taken from Allison's ring. It fit perfectly, just as he thought. He quietly closed the door behind him, locking it with her key. He got into the car, closing the door as quietly as possible. He pulled out of the driveway and drove away, leaving his headlights on until he reached the street. He got an idea and drove into the store. He took out his phone and called his old friend R.K. Evans. In the service, Mark knew him as Corporal Evans, but all his friends simply called him R.K. After leaving the service, R.K. founded his own private detective agency, and Mark helped him with financial matters. "Hello," R.K. said sleepily as he answered the call. "Hey, R.K., it's me, Mark," Mark said. "Sorry for the late call, but I need your help." "What happened, Mark?" asked R.K. "You got into a fight at the bar, and they need you out." "Not really," Mark said. "Can you come to me in 15-20 minutes?" "Yes, of course," said R.K. "Is everything okay? What's going on?" "It's better not to talk about this on the phone," Mark said. "Got it," R.K. said. "I'll be with you in 20 minutes. "Thanks, buddy," Mark said. "I appreciate it." "Hey, Semper Fi, do or die, right?" asked R.K. Mark chuckled. R.K. liked to say that. "Hooray," said Mark. They ended the call and Mark looked at the store. To hell with it, he thought. He bought a pack of beer and a couple of packs of cigarettes. He hadn't smoked since he left the service, but at the moment he felt like he needed to do something to avoid hitting someone or something. He returned home and put the beer in the refrigerator, taking one for himself. He opened a pack of cigarettes and lit one while sitting on the couch, using the candy bowl with their photo inside as an ashtray. It was a wedding gift, and Allison loved to keep it filled with candy and sweets. He didn't care if Allison complained about the smell, especially after what happened earlier. At that moment, he heard the doorbell and saw that it was R.K. He invited his old friend inside and offered him a beer. "What's wrong, buddy?" R.K. asked as he opened his beer. Mark told him what happened earlier in the evening. "Damn it," R.K. said when Mark finished. Mark handed him a container of wine with something mixed in it. "Can you analyze this?" he asked. R.K. nodded. "Yes, but the results won't be out until Monday or Tuesday," R.K. said. "I also want everything you can find out about Jake Marcus, John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins," Mark said. "I understand that Jenkins works for Henderson Manufacturing. I don't know who he works with." He took out his phone and found a video of those who were in Jake's house. "Here's a photo of them. I know it's not the best." "Got it," R.K. said. "Do you want surveillance inside their house and yours?" "Yes, if you can," Mark said. "I have the key if you need it. I didn't see the security system, but that doesn't mean anything." R.K. took the key and looked at it. "No problem," he said. How did you get it, by the way? I took it from Allison's ring, Mark said. RK nodded. You realize you probably won't be able to use the video from their house as evidence, right? Asked RK. I thought so, Mark said. This is personal. I don't care about the legal aspects right now. Got it, RK said. Mark gave RK a spare key to his house. Here is the key to my house, said Mark. He wrote down the 4-digit code and gave it to RK. And this is the code for my security system. I don't think I'll need the key. If you want, I can install the equipment while I'm here, RK said, handing back the key. High-definition audio, everything. Heck, I can even record conversations on your landline. Do it, Mark said. How much will it cost me? Don't worry about it, RK said. You saved my life in Iraq. It's the least I can do for you. Thank you, old friend, said Mark. At least let me cover your expenses. Okay, if you insist, RK said. What else do you have? You showed me part of the video you took. Let's watch the whole thing and see what we can find. Mark turned on the video and started it from the beginning. They could see when the substance began to affect Mark. The camera captured the moment he lay down on the sofa and then showed 4 people looking at him. They heard Allison ask if he was okay and Jake told him to take a nap. Then they saw Allison lean over and whisper something in his ear. Mark remembered this, but could not remember what was said. Okay then, Jake said. Let's go upstairs and start the real party. Yay, Allison said, heading up the stairs. The camera did not record any movement, but sounds of sex were heard coming from the bedroom. Mark finished the video and put his head in his hands. RK placed an encouraging hand on his shoulder. I know this will be hard for you, but we will help you through it, he said. Mark nodded. Thank you, RK, he said. What are you going to do? Asked RK. I'm divorcing her, no questions asked, Mark said. Got it, RK said. Why don't you get out of here for a few days and let me and the boys handle it? What are you going to do? Mark asked. It's better for you not to know, said RK. All I can say is that we just witnessed a criminal conspiracy. If this works out, someone will end up in jail. But we need to get you out of here for a while. But I can help you, said Mark. RK shook his head. No, he said. You're in danger now, and the last thing we need is for you to attack one of them. Remember old Sergeant Johnson. He's retired and lives in Vegas now. He owed me a few favors. He said he'd get you settled. If I ever want to visit Vegas, I'll call him and see what he can do for you. Mark nodded. Okay, he said. Let me set up the audio and video surveillance equipment here, and then I will leave. You must remain calm. Understood? Mark nodded. Thank you, RK. You're a good friend. I appreciate it, Mark said. RK smiled. Semper Fi, brother. Do or die, RK said. Hooray, said Mark. He went out onto the back porch with a beer while RK installed audio and video surveillance equipment in the living room and bedrooms. RK also connected a landline phone. He set up the system so that all audio and video were stored on a cloud server that could be accessed from anywhere on the internet. When he was finished, he gave Mark the server address and credentials to access the files. He also showed Mark a switch that would allow him to turn the surveillance system on and off. I'll call Johnson tomorrow and let him know what he says, RK said. One way or another, we'll get you out of here. Don't do anything stupid, okay? Got it, RK, Mark said. I hope so, Mark, he said. Hold on, my friend. I'll be in touch. I will, RK, Mark said. Thank you again for everything. After RK left, Mark turned on his computer and opened his bank accounts. He still had one of the accounts from before the wedding registered in his name only. Since marrying Allison, he had put 10% of his income into this account as an emergency fund. He hoped to use the money for the cruise as a surprise for Allison, but those days are over. He transferred half the funds from their joint account to his old account, then paid off and canceled their joint credit cards. He still had a card in his name from his old account. With that closed, he packed enough clothes to last him for a few days and threw the suitcases into the car. Returning to the house, his gaze fell on the wedding portrait hanging above the fireplace. Allison looked so beautiful in her wedding dress that day. He was the happiest man on earth and thought he had won the jackpot. But not anymore. Full of rage at her betrayal, he took a large hunting knife and cut the portrait. Once he was done, he looked around and took down all the photos that included Allison. They were all thrown into the fireplace. He went upstairs and pulled her wedding dress out of the closet, then threw it into the fireplace. He thought about burning it all right away, but decided to wait. At that moment, he was overcome with blind hatred for her, and he wanted her to personally see their marriage burn down. Then he had another idea. Taking a bottle of beer, he sat down on the sofa again and picked up the phone. He emailed the video to himself and checked it on his laptop. He wrote a very carefully worded letter to each board member and David, the interim CEO, detailing what had happened. He remembered what Alan had told him earlier. The council will not respond to threats, but they will respond to thoughtful analysis of the situation. He didn't know David very well, having only spoken to him a few times, but he hoped he would be as reasonable as the council members. Without threatening anyone, he reminded the board that Jake, as a manager, was required to act in accordance with the moral clause of his employment contract, and his actions, along with the actions of his wife, were exactly what the moral clause was written for. He also reminded them that their actions were not only criminal, but could also cause lawsuits and a scandal that could easily destroy Marcus Financial. He reminded them of his time with the company, telling them of his great respect for Alan. He said he hoped they would do the right thing. He reread the letter several times, editing a few words here and there. When he was happy, he wrote an email, attaching the letter and video, and sent it to David, as well as each board member, informing them that he would be on vacation the following week, but could be contacted by email or phone. He assumed he wouldn't hear back until Tuesday and planned to leave the area by then. He then sat down, lit a cigarette, and placed it in the candy bowl, watching as the heat from the burning cigarette burned Allison's face in the photo. At this moment, that's what he wanted to do to her. He took her phone and unlocked it. He knew the code because he had installed it when he first received it. He scrolled through her text messages and became even angrier. It seemed like she and Jake had been sleeping together for at least the last 6 months, but it was only in the last 3 months that Allison started openly disrespecting him in front of Jake. Of course, the fact that she slept with Jake was already disrespectful enough. He found a treasure trove of photographs, a lot of incriminating evidence. How could anyone possibly store something like that? He wondered who took the photos and whether they were taken with this phone or another device. There were also videos on the phone, videos of her having sex with Jake and others. No wonder she acted as if she already knew them, he thought. So, this is what she was doing, claiming that she was on business trips. He copied everything he could and emailed it to himself from her device. By then, he had drunk 6 bottles of beer and smoked half a pack of cigarettes, extinguishing them on her face at the bottom of his plate. He looked outside and saw that the sun had already begun to rise. Soon, he thought, she would wake up and realize that he was gone. He figured she'd be up and doing her business in an hour or two, so he grabbed his shotgun, made sure it was loaded, and locked both locks on the door. He then lay back on the couch with the shotgun next to him and tried to sleep. Allison woke up and looked at the clock on the nightstand next to Jake's bed. She saw that it was 8:30, so she got out of bed and went to the bathroom to clean herself up. Jake and the others started to wake up and were on their feet by the time she left the bathroom. Jake put on his robe and looked at Allison. "Do you want to go downstairs and make breakfast?" he asked. "Mark might want some coffee if he's waking up." "Yes, of course," she said. She put on her robe, went downstairs barefoot, and went to the kitchen. She put the coffee maker on and went into the living room to wake up her husband. Then she was surprised to find that he was not there. The Afghan she had thrown over him was discarded and his shoes were gone. She ran around the first floor, thinking that perhaps he was in the bathroom, but he was not there. Looking out the window, She realized that their car had disappeared. She turned and saw his ring lying on her bag, which was lying on the coffee table. "Oh shit," she gasped. She ran upstairs, screaming. Jake stopped her as she ran into the master bedroom. "What's happened?" Jake asked. "He's gone," she said. "What do you mean, gone?" Jake asked. "He's gone, damn it," she screamed. "He must have woken up in the middle of the night and left. He took the car and left his wedding ring." "Damn," Jake said. "You better call him and try to find him. Tell him he should come and pick you up." "Okay," she said, running back downstairs. She put Mark's ring in her bag and started looking for her phone, but it wasn't there. She was sure she had brought it with her last night. She never went without it. By then Jake was already downstairs. "My phone is missing," she said. "It's no big deal," Jake said. "Use your home phone." "You don't understand," she said. "I never go anywhere without it. It's full of texts, as well as photos and videos you sent me. If he found it, he's probably already seen everything." "Don't worry," Jake said. "We need him to come here. The boys and I will take care of the rest. Now call him." Allison nodded and picked up the phone in Jake's living room. She nervously dialed Mark's cell phone number, hoping he would answer. "Hello," Mark said when he answered. He sounded like he had just woken up. "Mark, honey, it's me," she said. "What do you want?" he growled. Allison recoiled. He had never spoken to her like that before. She realized that he must be very angry. She didn't realize how much. "Mark, honey, you weren't there when I got up, and I was worried about you," she said. "Are you okay?" "Why the hell do you care about me, bitch?" he asked. "Honey, I need you to come and pick me up from Jake's house," she said. "Can you do this for me, please?" Mark laughed out loud. "Go to hell," he growled. "Yesterday I may have been a fool, but now I am not, and you will never again be able to call me dear or beloved or anything else." "Mark, please don't be mad at me," she begged. "I really love you." "Yes, of course," Mark said. "Tell me something new." "Mark, we need to talk," she said. "Damn it, you're right," he said. "Then I need you to come to Jake and pick me up," she said. "We can discuss this on the way home." "Wrong answer," he said, causing her to recoil again. "No way in the world am I going there. If you want to go home, walk or call a taxi. The only thing we need to discuss is how we will divide all the property." "What do you mean, let's split it?" she asked. "This is what usually happens in divorce," he said. "I don't want a divorce," she said. "Please, can't we get over this?" "I also didn't want to be deceived and cheated on," he said. "Just come home if you want to talk. But I warn you, don't let Jake or any of the others take you home. I'm armed, and if any of them show up at my house, I'll use it, I swear to God. You got me." Okay, I'll call a taxi," she said. "Do it," Mark said, "and make sure you have cash or a bank card." "Why?" she asked. "Because your credit card doesn't work anymore," Mark said. "Why doesn't my credit card work anymore?" she asked. "Because I canceled it last night," he said. "Oh," she said quietly. "By the way, do you happen to know where my phone is?" "Yeah, it's here on the coffee table," Mark said. "Interesting collection of photos and videos, by the way. Now I know what you and that idiot have been doing for the last 3 months when you claim to be on business trips. They will really help me in my divorce case." "Oh God," she whispered. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said. "I never meant to hurt you." "Shut up and save your useless excuses for someone who cares," he said. "Now, if you want to talk, do it now while you can, and come alone." "I'll be there, Mark," she said after ending the call. Putting down the phone, she looked at Jake. "So what?" Jake asked. "He won't come," she said. He said. "He said I should come and talk to him." "Okay," Jake said. "We'll take you there." She shook her head. "No," she said. "He's armed, and he said don't let any of you show up. I think he really means it. You didn't hear him. I've never heard him so angry in my life." Jake thought for a moment, then walked into his office. He returned with a syringe in his hand. "Here's what we'll do," he said. Put this in your bag. Call a taxi and we'll follow you to your house. The first chance you get, you open the lid and inject it into his arm, all of it. Then call me. We'll be there. What is this? She asked. This is a special mixture I made for him, Jake said. It works pretty quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt him. He handed her the syringe and watched as she carefully placed it in her bag. Okay, she said. Just promise me you won't hurt him. We'll try, Jake said. Really, guys? He added, looking at the three men, who laughed. He turned back to Allison. Go call a taxi. She made an appointment with the taxi driver in half an hour and went upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she got into the car and drove away. Jake and his three friends got into his car and followed Allison, parking about a block from her house. None of them paid attention to the white van parked on the street in front of Jake's house. A few minutes after speaking with Allison, Mark's phone rang again. He saw that RK was calling, so he answered. What's happened? He asked. Just wanted to let you know that my guys intercepted a conversation between your wife and her accomplices, RK said. What? Mark asked. How? The wonders of modern technology, my friend, he said. You'd be surprised what we can do these days with a parabolic microphone. Anyway, your wife called a taxi and her boyfriend will be following him. They plan to inject you with something and kidnap you. Whatever it is, it's in her bag. Apparently, she's going to inject you with it the first chance she gets. My guys will be keeping an eye on Jake and his team when they leave. Damn, Mark said. Yes, said RK. Anyway, be careful. I'll text you when they come out. Turn on the surveillance equipment when she gets there, and I'll keep an eye on it. I'm only a few houses away. I'll call the cops when the time comes. Be prepared. Okay, Mark said. Thank you. He waited and received a message about half an hour later. They are on their way. Showtime, Mark said to himself. He knew he had about 20 minutes before they arrived, so he hid the shotgun in a place where Allison wouldn't immediately notice it and turned on the surveillance equipment. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a plastic bag with a lock for the syringe and a napkin. He saw the taxi stop in front of his house and watched as Allison paid the driver and got out of the car. She looked extremely nervous and had her hand on her bag slung over her left shoulder. He turned on the fireplace and watched as the photographs and her dress began to burn. She walked to the door and slowly opened it. She winced when she walked in and smelled cigarette smoke. Mark didn't care. Her eyes opened wide when she saw the destroyed portrait above the fireplace and became even wider when she looked at her dress and photographs turning to ash. My wedding dress, she exclaimed. Our photos. Mark, why are you doing this? Tears rolled down her face, but it didn't bother him. I wanted you to see for yourself what your actions did to us, he said. She looked at the beer bottles and cigarette butts in her favorite candy bowl. I thought you had a low tolerance for alcohol, she said, and I never knew you smoked. I used to smoke, but I quit, he said. As for the other thing, the truth is that I become a real villain when I get drunk. I made the decision to never get drunk again, just like you made the decision to become Jake's whore. Oh God, Mark, she said, crying. What have I done? You tell me, he said. What happened to you? You were the sweetest, kindest, most level-headed woman I've ever known. Who are all these men you slept with? Mostly clients, she said quietly. Jake made me. Oh, bloody wonderful, Mark said. You know, your actions could ruin Marcus Financial. Tell me, how long have you been planning all this bullying of me? Was it your idea, or was it something Jake suggested? She looked at him, shocked. I never. She began, but Mark interrupted her. Shut up, he said, taking out his phone. He played the video, letting her hear the conversation with her accomplices standing above him. Her face went white when she heard her own words. How did you get it? She asked. It doesn't matter, he said. The important thing is that David and the board members now have this video. The police will have it too. Not only are we getting a divorce, but if I get my way, you'll end up in jail for a very long time. I just want to know why. You don't understand, she said. It's a long story. Maybe you can tell me one day when I'm not inclined to wring your neck, Mark said. He watched as she began to open the bag, but before she could do anything, he snatched it from her hands and emptied the contents onto the coffee table. He saw a syringe with a dark liquid and took it with a napkin that he had prepared in advance. Is this what you planned for me? He asked. Do you even know what this is? Not really, she said. Not really, he asked sarcastically. You mean you were going to inject me with this without having the slightest idea what it actually was or what it could do? You're sick, did you know that? Jake told you to do it? She nodded. Yes, she said quietly. Okay, Mark said. Here's what we'll do. You call Jake. Put it on speaker so I can hear both sides. You tell Jake you did what he asked. I'll take it upon myself. Don't you dare tell him I'm here waiting. Do you understand him? You want me to set him up? She asked. Yes, said Mark. Have questions? She shook her head. No, she said. I understood everything. Okay, Mark said. Now call, and no tricks. Mark watched as she dialed the number and put it on speakerphone. Jake, it's me, Ellie, she said. Everything is ready. He passed out. Well done, girl, Jake said. We're on our way. She ended the call and looked at Mark. He'll kill me when he sees you're not unconscious, she said. Your problem, Mark said. Remember, no signals, nothing that could give away the truth. Otherwise, I might kill you myself. He sat down in the chair and waited for Jake to come inside. When he saw Jake and his three friends through the window, he closed his eyes, but left them slightly open so he could see what was happening. Jake enters the room and his eyes weigh heavily on the situation. He sees Allison, who, despite the circumstances, remains calm. With words of encouragement, Jake approaches Mark, intent on finishing what he started. However, suddenly, Mark opens his eyes and enters into active confrontation. The situation is heating up quickly. Mark, in full combat readiness, confuses Jake with an unexpected counterattack. The tension in the air is palpable and every moment feels decisive. But then other participants in the events burst into the room, and it seems that the balance of power will be restored again. At this moment, RK appears. He instantly assesses the situation and begins to act, calling Mark to reason. He convinces Mark that revenge will not bring him satisfaction and that the best course is to let justice prevail. Mark hesitates, listening to RK's words. There is an internal struggle in his eyes as he realizes the consequences of his possible actions. Ultimately, he decides to retreat, slowly putting his weapon away. This moment becomes a turning point, and everyone breathes a little more freely. Mark sat on the couch and watched as RK checked that both Allison and Jake were securely tied up. The other three were in the yard, also tied up by RK people. They heard the sirens of police cars stopping in front of Mark's house. Give me your phone, RK said. I'll go talk to the police before they come inside. Mark nodded and handed RK his phone. When RK left, Jake raised his head and turned to Mark. His grin finally disappeared. Apparently, he needed the thought of imminent death for this to happen. You know, my father always loved you more than me, Jake said. Mark shook his head. That's not true, Jake, Mark said. He always hoped that one day you would grow up and be able to take his place. 3 large policemen entered the house and inspected the situation. Picking up Jake and Allison, they read them their rights and led them out to the patrol cars. One officer looked at the syringe sitting on the coffee table in a plastic bag and picked it up. Is this what they were going to use against you? He asked Mark. Yes, this is it, Mark said. The officer took notes, taking Mark's full statement. After about half an hour, he turned to Mark. You're lucky, you know, he said. No, Mark said. My fellow Marine had my back. The officer smiled and nodded. Semper Fi, the officer said, shaking Mark's hand. Hooray, Mark replied. After they left, RK walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. Do you have another one of these? He asked, pointing to the beer bottles. I think I have a couple more, Mark said. It's too early for that, don't you think? After all this, no, RK said as Mark handed him a cold bottle. How are you holding up? Okay, Mark said. I feel like I'm in Iraq. I think I need some rest. Yes, about that, said RK. I talked to Gunny this morning. He said he'd take care of everything if you wanted to go to Vegas for a few days. Tell me to give you his number. I might do that, Mark said. I need to take care of a couple of things here first. RK pulled out a couple of cards from his pocket and handed them to Mark. Here's Gunny's number if you want to call, he said. The second card is for the divorce lawyer I work with, Michelle Hawkins. She's a real shark. Hates cheaters. I took it upon myself to call her this morning. She said she's expecting you in her office at 8 on Monday morning. Thank you, Mark said, nodding his head. For all. Hey, Semper Fi, brother. Do or die, RK said. Mark chuckled. Bloody hello, he replied. After they finished their beer, RK stood up and looked around. Looks like you have a bit of cleaning to do around here, so I'll go, he said. See you later, friend, Mark said. I'll go get some surveillance equipment later. RK left and Mark started cleaning the house. That night, he received a call from David Matheson. Mark, this is David Matheson, the older man said when Mark answered the phone. Yes, Mr. Matheson, how can I help you? Mark asked. For starters, you can call me David, he said. I received your email and watched the video. The board members did the same. We all agree with what you said in your letter, which I must say was quite impressive. Thank you, David, Mark said. Please, he replied. We also agreed that both Allison and Jake should be fired immediately, especially since they are both currently in custody. I'm heading to the county jail to handle this personally. There are a couple other things. What is this? Mark asked. We think you could use a few days to rest and relax, David said. Is there a place you'd like to go for a while? A friend offered to watch me in Vegas for a few days, Mark said. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer on Monday, and then I'll probably go. Vegas, huh? Asked David. Well, I can't think of a better place to get away from it all. Have a nice trip, Mark. See you in a week from Monday. Thanks, David. I'll do that, Mark said. There are a couple more things, David said. We unanimously agreed that with Jake gone, you would be the best candidate to fill his position. Mark asked. Absolutely, David said. We're very impressed with the way you handled this situation, and the board of directors has been looking at you for a while now. I won't lie to you, they're very pleased with your performance. Of course, with this position, there will be a raise and a few other benefits, but I think you're deserved it. Thank you, David, Mark said. You don't need to thank me yet, David said. The first thing we need you to do is oversee an external audit that we will conduct. We will bring in auditors from an outside firm to review everything Jake touched during his tenure. They will report directly to you, and you will report the results to me, whether they are good, bad, or neutral. I think it's a good idea, Mark said. Well, I'll leave it in your capable hands. In the meantime, have a nice trip and see you in a week from Monday, David said. See you later, David, Mark said. Thank you. After a call from David, Mark finished cleaning the house, then mowed the lawn, as he usually did on Saturdays. He then called Gunny Johnson, and the two of them chatted about everything. So, do you want to come over for a few days and have fun? Gunny asked. Yes, of course, Mark said. Okay, Gunny said. Come, I'll give you a nice room and show you how everything works here. Then you're on your own. And remember, this is Las Vegas, not Bangkok. They laughed. I'll remember, Gunny, Mark said. See you Monday night. See you, Mark, Hanny said. RK came in and picked up his equipment. Just wanted to give you a little update, RK said. The cops searched Jake's house and found a mountain of evidence. Damn, Mark said. RK stayed for dinner and Mark fell asleep soon after, exhausted both mentally and physically. The next day, he began throwing all of Allison's things into trash bags. He took them to the garage and decided to wait to take them all to the charity until he knew for sure that she would go to prison. The next morning, he was at Michelle Hawkins' office at 8:00 sharp and was immediately ushered inside. She studied his evidence and documents and took notes as he spoke. She explained California divorce laws to him and told him that everything was usually divided equally. Since they had no children and the house was his before their marriage, the court would likely allow him to keep the house. Since he had already split their bank accounts, she said the court would likely give the half remaining in their account to Allison. She also clarified that her adultery cannot be used in the divorce case. However, the criminal charges against Allison will likely be taken into account by the judge in any decision. She also said it's unlikely he'll have to pay Allison child support while she's in prison, but that could change when she's released. "I will do everything I can to make this process as painless as possible," Michelle said. "I will draw up the documents and submit them for review. If she signs them as they are, I will present them to the judge. From now on, the case will have to wait 6 months." Mark agreed and gave her an advance for the job before leaving. On his way home, he stopped at the county jail to tell Allison that he was filing for divorce. He sat down at the table and watched as they brought her. She looked gaunt, and the orange robe didn't particularly flatter her figure. They held up their tubes to communicate through a thick plexiglass shield. "Hi, Allison," Mark said. "Hi, Mark," she replied. "I just wanted to let you know that I saw a lawyer today and I'm filing for divorce," he said. "I thought so," she said. "When is your hearing?" he asked her. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "The prosecutor demands that we be held in custody without bail." "I think that would be better," he told her. "Tell me something, and I want to hear the truth from God." "What is this?" she asked. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked her. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "At first everything was going well at work," she said. "Jake seemed like any other boss. It all started after Alan died. Jake was furious that he wasn't promoted, and he blamed you, saying his dad probably set it up so you got the job." "This is crazy," Mark said. "Alan always said he hoped Jake would become CEO one day." "I know," she said. "We went to New York that weekend, and that's when it all started. We were at a club with some of our clients, dancing and drinking. Nothing too wild. Yes, I flirted a little, but I didn't think I was going out of line. Suddenly, I started feeling really good, and before I knew what was happening, I found myself in bed with 2 other guys Jake joined later." She paused for a moment before continuing. "The next morning, I realized what had happened, and I felt very guilty," she said. "Then Jake showed me some photos and videos he took and said I had to do whatever he wanted or he would show them to you." "So he was blackmailing you." I'm not surprised," Mark said. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" she asked. He chuckled before answering. "Not just no, but damn no," he said. "You cheated on me with that bastard and God knows who else. You're crazy. Don't even ask so we can be friends." "I understand, Mark," she said. "I hope it was worth it," he said. "Goodbye, Allison." He hung up and watched her do the same, tears rolling down her cheeks. He went home, packed his things, and headed to Vegas. He met up with Gunny Johnson, and they had dinner and reminisced about old times. After that, Gunny showed him around the city and gave him some gambling tips, then walked him to his room. When they entered, Mark saw a cute young brunette sitting on the bed. She stood up as they entered. "Mark, this is Candy," Gunny Johnson said. "She'll be your, guide while you're here." "Gunny, that's really not necessary," Mark said. "Nonsense, son," said Gunny. "This is exactly what you need after what your wife did to you. Relax, have fun, and remember what happens here stays here, usually." Everyone laughed. "Well, I have to go." "Have fun," he added before leaving. Mark turned to Candy. "Tell me, do you?" he began. "From an escort agency?" Candy asked. "Slut? Not anymore, thanks to Gunny. He got me out of a really bad situation, and thanks to him, I'm clean and working at a real job. He told me a little about you and asked if I would mind spending some time with you. That's all. If you want, I'll leave and never bother you again." "No," Mark said. He's right. I need some company right now. And you're a very nice woman. Do you want to go get a drink or something? Sounds good, she said, smiling. They went to a club, drank a few cocktails, then talked and danced for several hours before returning to his room, where she stayed the night, helping him forget his problems. The rest of the week went more or less the same, and by Friday he was ready to go home and get on with his life. Candy didn't want to let him go, but she understood. She gave him her phone number and email address in case he ever wanted to contact her. He liked her, but he didn't think it would ever develop into a full-fledged relationship. She was much younger than him and had her whole life ahead of her. Still, he thought, who knows? He returned home with a smile on his face, memories of Candy running through his head. When he returned, he learned the latest news about Allison and her accomplices. The judge, after seeing the evidence presented by the prosecutor, ruled that all of them would be held without bail. He also received confirmation from Michelle that Allison had been notified of the divorce filing. According to Michelle, Allison signed them immediately and the documents were filed in court. In 6 months, he will be free of her forever. The following Monday, he came to work to find that all his belongings had been moved to Jake's old office. Everyone welcomed his return and wished him luck in his new position. He settled into the new office and met with the external auditors. He placed them and met his new assistant, Marcia Bodine. He had known her since she joined the company several years ago. He liked her. He knew that she was married and received high ratings from her previous managers. She also knew about his situation and tried not to mention it. The audit revealed many inconsistencies in Jake's documentation. For starters, he falsified his travel reports on several trips he took with Allison. The auditors then discovered that Jake had mismanaged some of their clients' accounts. This was immediately reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), and Jake soon faced federal charges. Mark and David spent a lot of time in the following months cleaning up the mess Jake left behind. Luckily, they didn't lose any clients due to their prompt response, but they did have to have some very awkward discussions with other executives who were clearly unhappy. Meanwhile, Mark kept in touch with Candy, mostly by email. Eventually, she told him that she had met someone, and they were getting pretty serious about each other. He was not surprised and wished her all the best. At the same time, Allison and Jake's trials dragged on as charges were added and motions were passed back and forth. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her accomplices, although her defense team tried to keep him from doing so, saying he was under no obligation to testify against his own wife. "I may not be required to, but I want to," he told her lawyer. "Besides, in a few weeks, she won't be my wife anymore." The jury was shocked when they heard his testimony, and even more shocked when they were shown the video Mark took that Friday night. The day finally arrived when the jury announced their verdicts. Mark and David sat in the courtroom and watched as Allison, Jake, and 3 other men were brought in. None of them could look Mark in the eyes. By now, the trial has become something of a media circus. The court was brought into order, and the judge asked if the jury had reached their decision. The foreman stood up and announced what they had done. Everyone waited with bated breath as the judge listed the charges, including conspiracy to kidnap. Jake faces additional charges. All of them were found guilty of all charges brought against them. The judge set a sentencing date, and the 5 already convicted conspirators were led out of the courtroom. Mark and David walked out, walking past a crowd of reporters shoving cameras in their faces. About 10 days later, they were sentenced. The judge made it clear that he was completely disgusted with all 5 and actually threw the book at them. A month after the sentencing, Mark was sitting in his office looking through some documents when Marcia called him on the intercom. "Mr. Hurley, Dr. Kristen Marcus is here to see you," she said. The name caught Mark's attention. "Send her," he said. The door opened and Mark saw an attractive blonde enter his office. Her hair fell below her shoulders and she wore a skirt that reached just below her knees. She smiled as she walked up to him and extended her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Dr. Hurley," she said. He shook her hand and invited her to sit down. "Please call me Mark," he said. Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Coffee would be great, she said. Black, please. And please call me Kristen. Mark asked Marcia to get them a cup of coffee and sat down as his assistant left the office. Marcus, Mark said, looking at her. Do you have anything to do with Alan? Perhaps his daughter? She smiled and shook her head. No, she said. I'm his niece. I see, Mark said. I'm surprised I didn't meet you earlier. I thought I had met almost everyone in Alan's family. I've been very busy, she said. I was in France when Uncle Alan died and couldn't come back for his funeral. So what can I do for you? He asked. I just wanted to meet the man who put my cousin in his place, she said. I take it there's not much love between you two, Mark said. She shook her head. No, she said quietly. I'm just glad to see that he was finally forced to pay for his crimes. I'm so sorry for what he did to you. As far as I know about you, you didn't deserve any of this, and I'm sorry, I heard a lot about you from my uncle. So, I see you're a doctor, Mark said. You are a doctor? No, I have a PhD in business and economics, she said. I teach at UCLA. My uncle and I have many similar interests, but I am more focused on academic science. And no, I'm not interested in moving to the corner office upstairs. Mark laughed at this. They talked for a while longer before she said she needed to get back to work. Mark didn't want the conversation to end, and in truth, he was interested in this woman. Listen, Kristen, Mark said, I would like to continue this discussion with you, say, over dinner. That is, if you don't mind being seen in public with a modest MBA degree. She smiled, and her eyes sparkled. There is nothing humble about being an MBA, she said, and I would really like to be seen with you in public. Dinner would be great. How about Red Lobster tonight at 7 Azu? She handed him a card with her number and address. This is Red Lobster, Mark said, taking the card from her. I'll pick you up at 6:30 if that works. See you then, Mark. It was great meeting you, she said before leaving. Mark and Kristen dated for several months and fell in love. She almost knocked him to the floor, smothering him with kisses when he asked her to marry him. I understand, right? Mark asked when she finally allowed him to breathe. No, she said. Hell yeah, Marine. Now take me upstairs. Yes, ma'am, Mark said as he carried his bride upstairs. Yes, he thought, things are going well. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.